Let's have a look at paper 2 question 3. So this one is relatively simple because it's exactly the same as paper 1 question 2. This is the language question. So how you prepare for paper 2 question 3 is exactly the same as how you would for question 1, paper 1. And so a lot of the advice is going to be the same. Let's start by looking at the question. So we've got 3 examples here and you'll notice some similarities. So as you can see, it will tell you to look at one specific source text, typically source A, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it'll be source B, and it will refer to the lines you'll need to stay within. Okay, so lines 18 to 28, lines 11 to 27. The third one doesn't have any line numbers. It should have line numbers, but it can't be guaranteed, so make sure you check that. Okay, so the question's worth 12 marks, so you're looking to spend between 12 and 15 minutes on it. I would be looking to write 3 what, how, why paragraphs in that time. Okay, so the reason it asks you to stay within the lines is that's where the best and richest language use will be. So they won't give you something that doesn't have something decent to go on. That's where you want to be focused at. So it's not an attempt to hinder you, it's an attempt to help you. So don't work outside the lines, don't forget to look at those lines. I would put a box around those lines using the highlighter and make sure that you stick to them. Okay, so next, let's look at how you're being assessed. So what is it that you need to do in the exam to gain marks? Okay, so on here you've just got a very simple little grid, and we've talked about these levels before. So most of you are looking for a level 3 or level 4 response. A level 3 response is clear use of what, how, why. Okay, so the writer uses, for example, this shows. You're looking for a relevant range of quotations. That means looking at least 3 quotations, and you want to use clear and accurate terminology. Please remember that what you see in a text is different, may be different to somebody else. So you may see imagery, somebody else might see a simile, somebody else might see a metaphor. Okay, so now like paper 1, these bullet points are not equally weighted. The first is the most important, and it decides whether you come in at 1, 4, 7 or 10 marks. One comment could mean you're on 1 mark or you're 10 marks depending on the quality of it. So you could make one detailed what, how, why and still get 10 marks. Or you could get 1 mark. So it's the quality of your writing response. So if you make a simple comment, you're level 1. An attempted comment is level 2. A clear comment is level 3. And a perceptive comment is level 4. It's why you can write 4 sides of paper if you wanted to and still only 3 marks, or you could write 1 side and be 12 marks. It all depends on the quality of what you write. So your comment is really important. It's what you say about why the writer has used that technique. So why do so many candidates fail to get out of level 1? Almost 20% of marks from this question were 1, 2 or 3 marks. That's because, often people are quite waffly. They make really waffly comments like this makes the reader want to read on, and it could apply to literally any text on any paper. So these are things like it makes the reader want to read on, it hooks the reader, it tantalizes the reader, engages the reader, it baffles the reader, arouses the reader's curiosity. You can be as fancy if you like, but if you really mean it makes us want to read on, you're going to get stuck at 3 marks. Secondly, people get stuck in level 1 because they identify techniques like synesthesia, asyndetic listening, hyperbole, but they don't actually comment on the effects of these things. You've got to talk about why the writer has chosen these techniques. Okay, so you have to explain, detail why the writer has selected that technique. So if you're going to put the writer uses synesthesia, put in the quote and say this makes the reader read on, you're only getting 3 marks. You have to explain why. So this evokes an atmosphere of This raises the question for the reader of and actually explain in detail. This slide here is straight from the examiner's report, which is in the public domain, so you can see it there. So you don't have to just take my word from it. So basically, this is saying that picking out the most simple techniques will get you just as a high mark as spotting a fancy one. So you can pick out an ing word, a verb, you can say imagery, you can say simile. You don't have to say anything fancy to get to the top marks. So how should you be going about preparing this question? So a lot of the things, a lot of it is actually in the things you do before you answer. So that comes down to your identification of the juicy bits of the text. So we've talked about this, where the first thing you should do is highlight all the quotations that could fit, and then pick the ones that you're going to be able to say most about. Remember, it's not the fanciest technique, it's the thing that you can talk about in detail. So believe it or not, given all those words, better candidates will rely time and time again on a very narrow bank of useful quotations. Yeah, they won't cover everything. They'll pick things very carefully. So by and large, the candidates at the top end have unconsciously focused in on the extract on the same kind of quotes. They will pick the things out that they can say the most about. Okay, so what you should do is read the question, highlight any quotes to do with that, then pick out the language devices, and then pick out the things that you can say most about. So once you've underlined everything and labelled everything that could be useful, it's time to think like the most successful students do. Narrow down and focus in 3 or 4 really, really interesting bits. By and large, you're looking for single words or short phrases, not huge chunks. It's also generally true that the longer your quote, the fewer marks you'll get. You are wasting time copying out long quotes. We are looking for judicious quotes, that means short ones. Okay, you're focusing on a very small number of words and explaining very clearly why those words are effective. Okay, so this is an example of something I have done. On my first go through, I have picked out lots of interesting phrases that apply to the question. Okay, so lots and lots of things that I picked out. On my second go through, I'm going to label for techniques and I'm going to pick out the ones that I can say most about. So when you've seen me do this in class, I number my quotations, which is my best quote, which is the next one, which is the one after that. That ensures that my quotations are judicious and wise. Okay, so you're looking at eliminating your rubbish quotes. Right, so you'll see what I've done here. Okay, I've picked out the ones that I can talk most about. A sleepy ball of scrunched up flesh, determinedly, irrationally. So I'm already making connections between my adverbs. Okay, I'm looking at my plosive B in Barks gibberish. I'm looking at the metaphors that are there. So, the semantic field of war with the ambushers were confronted. So I'm going to very, very carefully pick out the best quotations, the best techniques that I can talk about. So you know how to do this question, okay? So what, how, why question. So it suggests that, it makes us think, it is designed to, it gives the impression. So the writer uses, for example, this shows, or it may indicate that. You know the structure. You don't have to deviate from that structure if you don't want to. So I've got my example question here. You now need to refer to only source A from lines 18 to 28. How does the writer use language to describe his son? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you an example. The writer describes how his son has changed, saying he was a sleepy ball of scrunched up flesh, but is now determinedly his own person, with the tense change highlighting what he once was and how he now is. It's the way he described his son as having been a ball of scrunched up flesh that is most interesting, with flesh sounding like he's almost not even alive or human, that he was unrecognisable even as a human being. But as he's grown older, he's described as being determinedly his own person, which shows how he's grown up, not just physically, but developmentally, becoming determined, which could suggest he's strong-minded or stubborn. Certainly that he's becoming an individual, and that he's almost driven to be an individual, rather than that of an unidentifiable ball of flesh he once was. It sounds as if the writer is both proud and a little scared of how single-minded and obstinate his son is at being his own person. So what I've done here is a very clear what, how, why, and I've talked about those quotes in detail. I've picked two quotations that are connected here. Sleepy ball of scrunched up flesh, now determinedly his own person, but I've very much, you can see the what, how, why structure the writer uses. For example, is the quote, the tense change highlighting. And then I've gone really into detail about the individual words and then explain what I think the writer's effect was. Okay, so that's a fancy what, how, why, but it's no different than the basic framework that we've learnt in class. So if I was going to summarise my advice for paper 2, question 3, use the reading time well to outline the broad brushstrokes and narrow in on the right details. That gives you plenty to discuss. This double layer reading will allow you to sift and synthesise, prioritising the important and weeding out the less relevant or useful. So that's my highlight the techniques, label the devices, number to pick the best ones. Remember that effect is everything. Your comment on the effect of the words chosen is what puts you in a level band. The better and more detailed your comment is on the effect of those words, the higher a level you will get. Use subject terminology appropriately and carefully, but do not use it to have a feature-led approach. So you're not picking out techniques. The quotation is the priority. You're better off saying this use of imagery or this sentence than picking out something that you're not sure what it is and what it does. Do not feature pick.